Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of It's in Denver's Nature podcast. This is a podcast produced in collaboration with Denver Parks and Recreation and Denver Community Media, where we are in the studio today. If you'd like to know more about what Denver Community Media is, check us out at denvercommunitymedia.org. We're here in the studio with a few guests who are going to discuss with us the topic of urban canopy. Tell us what you do, starting from my left.
Hello, I'm Mike Swanson. I'm the city forester of the City County of Denver.
Hi, I'm Kim Yuen Farrell. I'm the executive director of the Park People. We are a 50-plus-year-old nonprofit organization that works with communities to plant trees and improve parks for a healthy, resilient future.
Awesome.
And I'm Brad Patterson. I work for the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency in Denver. And I have the honor and pleasure of working on building equitable community resilience, increasing biodiversity and ecological health through a lens of climate change vulnerabilities. And we've identified those in Denver as air quality, drought, flood, extreme weather, and heat. And so I look to use nature-based solutions to protect people and property in Denver from those.
Hi, Sincera.
Hi, my name is Sensory Eads, Assistant Director for Planning, Design, and Construction, specifically focusing on urban ecology and trails, and get to work with all of these great guests today on a lot of the work we're going to talk about.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. And we're going to just, dive into urban canopy, just understanding in more general terms, like if we can talk about what makes urban canopy, what is an urban canopy, and what are some of the benefits of having trees in our city?
I'll jump in with the, as we call it in the trade, UTC, urban tree canopy. But just pretend you're looking from above Denver, bird's eye view. The canopy is actually a layer of leaves, branches, and stems of individual trees, which create a collective, the urban canopy, that kind of covers up the ground, shades the ground when viewed from above, like I said. And the collective is more beneficial, say, than an individual tree.
What would you say are the benefits of having, collectively having so many trees in the city?
So there are many. I wrote them down.
Great.
So I'm going to look at them as I
Yes.
speak. Stormwater management function. The canopy of the tree, the leaves, the branches, the stems, they help to intercept rainfall to slow it down. So the rainfall can percolate into the soil like Mother Nature intended it to do, and or it also slows down the rainfall. So when it hits like a parking lot or a street, it helps the storm drainage system kind of just take it all in. So it kind of slows down the capacity. So there's one. The big one that I think our urban forest can really help with is the urban heat island, because trees provide shade.
Right.
It reduces heating and cooling costs. Denver's tree canopy also lowers air temperature through evapotranspiration and shade. Reduces air pollution, catches the particulates, like on those. I live in Lakewood, so I look out over Denver, and you can see the brown clouds.
Yeah.
So just those particulates that trees can kind of capture and hold for a little bit. Also increases property values. Lately, nationally, and even globally, a lot about public health, mental health, nature, just not trees, but green things actually kind of de-stresses us.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know if anybody else has anything else.
Yeah. No, Mike, I think you covered so much there. I think whenever I think about the important benefits and services that our urban tree canopy, our urban forest provides, I think in terms of like all these environmental benefits, like the shade and cooling for our community, like the storm water management and flood reduction and those kinds of things. And then the economic value. There are studies that show that, business districts that have well-lined, have a great, street tree canopy, are able to attract and retain shoppers, and people are more willing to spend money in those areas. So it kind of supports local economies. And then the social benefits, there are so many social and health benefits. studies show that, recovery rates of patients in a hospital room, if they have views of trees and green spaces, are actually faster than if you're just looking at the interior walls of a hospital room. And just a really amazing suite of services and benefits that trees provide to us, and that really make them not just a nice amenity to have, but actually a really critical part of our urban communities.
Yeah.
And if I may add, I think Kim probably talk about this later, but the urban forest also provides jobs
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
through maintenance and protection, preservation, and
Yeah.
renewal of the urban forest. So
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And piggybacking off of what Mike and Kim were talking about community benefits, mental health, and health like that, I really think that the tree canopy in Denver is really good for getting people together, like building community and just everyone. It gets people out of their houses, it gets people convening together, and then it gets people exercising. So there's that physical health part. The tree canopy in Denver is also really important to protect biodiversity and give habitat and shelter and food for our urban wildlife. And it's really great for that as well.
And speaking of the urban canopy in Denver, what makes up sort of like the ecosystem of trees in Denver? What kind of trees can we find in Denver?
My thoughts were simply this, that there's approximately 500,000 contributing individual trees that contribute to the Denver's urban canopy, tree canopy, and it's contiguous, right?
Mhm.
What I mean by that is that it's just not let me reframe that. So contiguous meaning the public trees that the city inspects, monitors, maintains is basically about 16% of the whole forest.
Got it.
So even
Okay.
the park trees. It's the other private property trees that make up Denver. So that's what I mean by contiguous. I'm fond of saying that Denver's urban forest is a three-legged stool. So you have the right-of-way, you have the parks and parkway trees, but then you have the private trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, I think in our park system, we probably have 400 different species.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, sometimes they're just an individual tree,
Yeah.
but that's the point. And
Yeah.
then we have ash, which make up like 13% of the urban canopy. So,
Yeah.
again, that's a huge question.
Yeah. Yeah. We would have to make a whole podcast series just about all the types of trees that make up the urban canopy. I want to dive more into the history of trees in Denver. What do we know about the current trees? When did the city start planting trees, and how the strategy of planting trees in the past is different from the strategy today?
Denver was founded because there's gold in that stream. So people started coming into the confluence, Cherry Creek and South Platte. That's how Denver started, right? And there was trees along the waterways, mainly cottonwoods and willows. But kind of surprised me when I looked into this years ago that they weren't like 1, 2, 3 like uniform. They were spotty.
Okay.
But they're right along all the waterways, all where it's moist and wet. So there's kind of a misconception about Denver with a lot of trees back then. Anyway, so when the pioneers started coming into Denver and settling the area, they brought in their species from the east. Pecans, walnuts, sour cherries, oaks, maples, you name it, elms. That's kind of how it all started, right? But then come along a couple of years after that, I'm really breezing through a lot of history here. But that, there's Mayor Spear and his Arbor Day efforts where they gave away 1 million trees in one Arbor Day. And most of these trees were fast growing because back in the day, they wanted shade, kind of like the same deal we're going through right now. They wanted shade, so they planted fast growing trees, elms, maples, cottonwoods for the most part. They were watered there was actually canals along the streets where that's how they watered the trees at first in the right of way. And then the parks and parkways, as that began to grow in the late 19th century, I'm really maybe I need to ramble less. But anyway, in the late 19th century, that's when the park system actually started becoming developed. And a lot of those trees were hand watered because there was not a lot of irrigation.
Oh, wow.
Is that correct?
And then as part of the kind of city beautiful movements. Trees were a huge component of how we beautified our downtown and park spaces. But can you speak to some of the work that we're doing around researching new trees that are more climate adapted? Because as you mentioned, this was a prairie landscape, and then we introduced a lot of trees into a very high plains kind of desert environment. And we've had to rely on a lot of water resources to sustain the trees that we do have. And we want to maintain that canopy, but we also need to prepare for the changing climate and our water resources. And so can you speak to some of the research the forestry division is doing on kind of how we're preparing for that transition?
For about 15 years or so, we've been pulling plant lists from Western Kansas, Western Oklahoma, New Mexico, even sometimes in Arizona, Montana. We'd be just pulling plant lists, and basically, I would explore the nurseries to see which of these more regionally appropriate xeric trees that can be bought, right? And sometimes I would buy smaller ones just to see if they would grow, see if they can get through establishment. But we've tried Arizona cypress. We even tried bald cypress, which do really well here in wet spots, by the way. And a couple oaks. Chinkapin oak does really well. Texas red oak, Quercus bucklei, does really well.
But the point is I think it's important to just demonstrate that we are paying attention to.
We've been paying attention for 15 years plus.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think just, as we're educating residents that we can still grow our urban canopy and preserve water and do landscape transformations. And so as, we think back on all the other episodes, it's not an either or. We can do both. It's just we have to be very intentional about where we're planting trees and different species. So it's great to hear that we're continuing to research and expand the species list to be able to achieve kind of all these different goals we've talked about throughout the podcast series.
Yeah.
Well, and in the face of climate and just changes and our continuing changes to come, I think in addition to researching and looking and trying out species that are more adapted to warmer temperatures, southern climates, and also drought tolerance, I think that we also continue to know how important it is to diversify our urban forest, that we've got to be aiming for species diversity. The emerald ash borer has been such a real focus, an important focus of recent years. This one beetle that stands to wipe out 1 in 6 trees in Denver because we overplanted ash trees. So we're still, very much have that lesson in mind of let's diversify the species that we're planting, because that'll give us best shots at resilience and health of our forest in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that the Office of the City Forester has been taking part of and playing a big part in is the re-release of the new Front Range recommended tree species list. And it hasn't been changed or edited since 2010, I believe. And so it's due for that. And so there's some new tree species listed on that list that we can try out that are really have a great chance of doing well here in our climate.
Yeah.
And in that list, since I was on the first one 12 years ago, it's a tree is not considered safe to plant in Denver unless there's a 10-year track record of it for maintenance. And
that has to be sort of like a proven history that the tree can do well in our climate. Speaking,
Sorry, can I add one more
Yeah,
thing?
for sure.
One thing that I think is so wonderful, Denver Forestry through Denver Parks and Rec, has been just this champion of trees for all time. And the park people, we started doing urban forestry work over 50 years ago, and in the more recent decades had started focusing a lot on tree equity because our urban forest is really inequitably distributed. Some of our neighborhoods generally, like with many cities, the affluent neighborhoods in Denver are well forested. And then unfortunately, we have a lot of neighborhoods generally where residents are lower in income. There are usually high populations of people of color in these neighborhoods, and those are really low canopy neighborhoods. And so we started shifting our organization's focus to those low canopy neighborhoods, also knowing we need to serve the whole city. And Denver Parks and Rec has been such a great partner in that work, and would oftentimes, come to support with the street trees we'd be trying to distribute through our Denver Digs Trees program. And then we started a private property distribution, knowing, like Mike said earlier, that such a huge proportion of trees are on private property. They make up the vast majority of trees in the city, so that's a really important area of focus. So it was really heartening when the Climate Protection Fund was passed and the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency chose to really focus a lot of important resources towards private property. So I think that, in terms of strategy of how our city is working to plant and grow and steward trees, we've got this holistic approach to the work that is accounting for those park trees, those street trees in the public right of way, and the private property.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up, the context of tree inequity, because, as we all notice, some areas are more covered with trees, and then some other areas, lack the tree canopy. And I'm sure we'll dive in later to, some of the strategies specifically in some of those neighborhoods where tree inequity is more noticeable. I want to talk about climate change and urban forestry. What's the connection there? I want to kind of dive into some of the perhaps common misconceptions around planting trees. People might think, well, if we have more trees, then we need to use more water to plant those trees, and water is a precious resource. So, can we talk about some of those misconceptions and dive into that a little bit more?
Urban forestries, the way it battles climate change is actually through the process of photosynthesis, because CO2, tree grabs it with the sunlight, grabs the carbon, sinks it, collects it, sends it into branches, roots, trunks, everywhere, and then releases as a byproduct oxygen and water vapor.
Right.
That's basically what trees do when it comes to climate change, because the greenhouse gases, sunlight comes in, or sun energy comes in as light into our atmosphere, does its thing, but it leaves as infrared light or radiation. But these greenhouse gases, like the carbon dioxide, it actually, the infrared radiation actually hits the greenhouse and just bounces back, the greenhouse effect. So that's what trees and prairies and other plants, it's just not trees. It's anything green that photosynthesizes actually captures that carbon and sinks it until the tree is removed or falls down.
I'll add, the urban forest has such an important role related to climate change in that it can mitigate climate change by absorbing carbon from the atmosphere and sequestering it and storing it. Probably the role that we talk about most in our urban context is really helping our communities adapt to our warming climate through, directly shading our buildings and our streets, and also evapotranspiration, that community cooling process. It is helping to lower temperatures throughout our city. And that's really important for all of our neighborhoods. And then especially our low canopy neighborhoods and our neighborhoods that have the most hard paved surfaces, where the urban heat really builds up. So as we see our communities warming more and more over time, growing a robust forest that can help shade and cool those neighborhoods and our whole city is going to be really, really important to reducing the vulnerability of our populations that are living in these spaces.
Yeah.
We're being very intentional for where we're planting trees, making sure, again, like what Kim said, we're planting trees where people are, where we're shading pavement. And then evaluating those spaces where maybe we don't need to water certain areas of lawn. Like we've talked about, we're doing a lot of landscape transformations. And so now we're kind of rebalancing that use of water to provide additional water resources to trees as we're adapting species to be more drought tolerant, and then making sure we're being responsible with our water use and other landscape types. So I think that's one way Parks is doing a great job of making sure that we're kind of thinking about this as a system, and it's not just about trees, it's not just about the ground cover, but how are these systems working together? And then it's also important, like we've talked about before as well, just making sure that we have responsible use of irrigation and we're getting irrigation to trees, again, and then being efficient with the use elsewhere. So
Yeah.
And also, in regards to climate change, where the tree goes is really important. So right tree, right place is the best practice. And especially on private property, when we're choosing where to plant a tree, you got to think about where the sun's going to be most hot in the summer. Also, you're thinking about trees can also slow down really cold winds in the winter, and they can also save on heating bills, actually. So right tree, right place, you also don't want to mess with utilities underground or above ground. And that, causes economic pressures in other places. So think about that. And then also, trees can help create a resilient ecosystem, and healthy ecosystems can absorb climate shocks better, like heat waves and extreme weather, things like that.
How do you decide what areas of Denver need trees? What's the strategy behind planting trees?
One, we have our tree inventory. So we know
Yeah.
where the spaces are, at least in the right of way and parks and parkways, things like that. But there's also maps. I mean, given technology, GPS, GIS, there's maps out there. I'm sure this is going to come up in the conversation, but we're co-conveners in an IRA grant, and we have to follow certain federal guidelines, and we're actually going to put a layer on our tree inventory that's the Justice 40 map. So we're going to actually do work in those areas for the sets. But anyway, it's a lot about technology anymore these days. What you had to go out and field verify 20 years ago, you can just get on a computer and
Right.
go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that, the technology is so wonderful, the expertise of, our city staff that knows the city well. And then we also, our organization, and I think the city too, really values community voice.
Mm-hmm.
When community members in our neighborhoods are saying, we want more trees, we listen to that. We want to be careful about how we approach the work so that, communities that have historically not had much power or voice in decision-making processes have their voices heard about their needs and wants for their neighborhoods. They are local experts in their neighborhoods and local needs, and can oftentimes help really importantly inform our work and where we need to take on projects and plant more trees, steward more trees.
Okay.
And Denver's really latching onto that. And it's really important for Denver right now to listen to community too. I know that Forestry is doing their strategic plan right now, and their community outreach was robust across the city. Our office, the climate office, did an initiative called Rapid Assessments, where we went into nest neighborhoods and asked communities what they wanted. And trees were the top in almost every neighborhood, top three for sure. And so, listening to the community is really important. And then going back to data, the data is very clear on where we need to plant trees. We don't need any more data really. So, but there's city data from the office or the Division of Green Infrastructure and Denver Parks and Rec and City Forester that tells us where we need to go, where areas with low canopy. There's state maps that tell us the same things, and then there's federal maps that tell us the same things as well. So, and NEST neighborhoods, that acronym stands for Neighborhoods of Economic Stabilization. And they're just areas and neighborhoods and communities of Denver that need extra investment because they've been ignored or disinvested historically.
We've talked about the organization, your organization, Kim, the park people that really are involved in this mission of building and strengthening the urban canopy. Are there other organizations that are part of these? What is the role of the park people specifically?
Well, the Park People has for about 55 years been working on urban forestry efforts. So we have a number of programs, 5 different programs that we run. Probably our best known is our Denver Digs Trees program. So we provide free and affordable trees to Denver residents. Very much in partnership with Denver Parks and Recreation, we train community forester volunteers to, be this amazing volunteer force and groups of community leaders, community connectors in our low canopy neighborhoods to mobilize and execute on tree planting and greening projects. We also engage with groups to plant trees at parks and affordable housing communities and nonprofit headquarters. We plant in partnership with the department. Again, we plant tribute trees in our parks. And we also started about a year and a half ago, a workforce development program preparing individuals facing barriers to employment for careers in urban forestry, because we have a really significant labor shortage in the tree care sector locally. And so we need to be preparing people who need great job opportunities to help fill those roles for the municipal forestry departments, for the private tree care sector businesses that we need to plant and steward these trees now and into the future. And there are, I'm really happy we are definitely not alone in this work. In addition to having wonderful city partners at Denver Parks and Recreation and at the Climate Office, there are a lot of other wonderful individuals and organizations that come to the urban forestry cause. So we see, individual volunteers who come and get trained and become these amazing neighborhood advocates. We engage with a lot of resident groups, registered neighborhood organizations. There are a good number of other nonprofits that have similar and related environmental or community-based missions that partner with us in this work or run it independently themselves as well. And then there are also, businesses and the philanthropic community. And I think for the park people, we like to think of it as a whole community effort because not all of our trees are on city property and it blurs lines into private property and we all benefit from these trees. Mm-hmm. We really need our whole community to get behind the planting and the care of these wonderful, tall, woody creatures.
Yeah.
Creatures?
I mean, they are creatures, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not an initiative that starts from nothing. I mean, it takes a community, it takes the community effort and engagement. It's never about working in silo. It's always about working together with communities. If anyone wants to volunteer with the park people, what would you say is what are the steps that any individual need to take to volunteer?
We love volunteers. We welcome anybody to look into getting engaged with us. You can go to the Park People's website. That's just theparkpeople.org and find our volunteer page. You can apply to be a volunteer. And then we also just love for people to learn more about trees because the more people know in their neighborhoods, the more they can become advocates of trees in their neighborhoods or in other parts of our city. And if they see, a site that needs a bunch of trees or even a single neighbor that needs trees, they can help advocate and get those spaces planted. And we want to be a partner in that work.
So why is community engagement so important to urban forestry?
Community engagement is so important to urban forestry because when people get involved in the planting process or, just in saying, yes, come plant a tree at my house, that increases their sense of investment in that tree, which also supports their sense of kind of ownership and involvement and a sense of stewardship. And because, so many trees are on private property in our communities, because our city resources are limited, we need our residents to get involved in the stewardship of our trees across the board.
Yeah.
Urban and community forestry actually started as traditional forestry down in the towns and cities and municipalities, let's call it 100 years ago. But urban forestry is so different from traditional forestry, the foresters with the hats and cruising timber and whatever they're doing up there, well, protecting watersheds and things like that. Urban forestry is just not about the trees and the communities or the municipalities. It's truly about the humans. It's really about the people. That's what urban forestry is truly about.
Yeah. You basically, you can't have urban forestry without the people. They're a key component.
I mean, I'd want to debate that a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, as Brad mentioned earlier, I mean, do you think that there's still, yes, the human component in an urban environment, I think, is definitely the number one goal. But I think that our urban canopy does serve a huge kind of resource to our urban biodiversity and the health of our ecosystems too. So I just wanted.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying, as a program, urban forestry.
Yeah.
And this is just not Swanson talking. It's a global statement that urban forestry is really about the people.
So I think what Mike might be getting at is that we need the people to keep the trees alive in an urban setting. And one of the reasons community engagement is so important in that respect is that we need to meet people where they're at. We need to address a lot of misinformation and a lot of unknown things, and also understand the amazing things that the community can teach us in order to make that relationship happen, to have a tree growing on someone's private property, say. And we found a lot of success. There is a lot of success in culturally appropriate community engagement to get people to understand the value of trees. And also you can use a tree as a conversation starter to give other information to people that need other services in the city, and to address other big topics like climate change, and just use the tree as a conversation starter.
With that said, I mean, urban forestry is also very multidisciplinary. So what you just said, how a tree can actually start a conversation, but then it expands, it spreads into economic or social, sometimes spiritual or religious. It just expands.
Yeah.
So urban forestry can be very multidisciplinary.
Okay, so I want to follow up on your point, Brad. Talking about meeting people where they are, and I want to bring back the conversation in the communities that are more underserved, where there's a low urban canopy. What's the conversation there? Because you could have a family with some socioeconomical inequities, and maybe their first thought is not, I need more trees. Their first thought might be, I need to feed my family. So what's the balance there? How do you inform and educate those communities about the importance of tree, while at the same time, they have to balance their financial needs?
So the Climate Protection Fund that funds the climate office in Denver has a special ability to be used on private property, which is fantastic. The city has not been able to do that historically. And so going in to plant on private property is not really the best. The best way to do that is not to use the city knocking on people's doors. We need to use trusted community partners like the park people that have really a lot of experience with community engagement, and there is not that mistrust and that baggage that the city has in relation to these neighborhoods. And so that's really important.
Yeah.
When we first did our Focus Neighborhood Initiative back in 2002 in Whittier, that's exactly what, were you around?
I wasn't on staff.
But you probably heard about what we did. We knew that nobody trusted the city. They saw the city come in, they would drop the curtains, lock the doors, and just not even answer. So what we did exactly what you did. It wasn't sneaky. It was just, you got to think through it, right?
Yep.
We got an advocate on the neighborhood association that had a pretty strong voice in the community. Jim Rotten used to do CSA. Anyway, so that's what we did. And they've expanded that idea with their current program. I mean, it's just amazing what. Yeah. And even there's a research paper about Detroit. Have you guys read this paper? where the city came in and go, hey, we're going to give you trees, boom, boom, plopping them everywhere, right? The community didn't want them.
Yeah.
They didn't want them. They had other considerations like
Yep.
you were suggesting.
Yep.
So what you guys have done is awesome.
Community engagement is really important to have that one-on-one conversation, which is really rare to be able to engage with a community member like that. And after the community engagement and meeting people where they're at and concerns have been addressed with, up-to-date information, it's important to not leave then, right? And so in the past, that's how it has been. Plant trees, we're done here, and then rolling out. So there's establishment care written into contracts that the city is using. There's establishment care best practices that everyone who's following modern urban forestry practices right now is doing that now. And so not just leaving, staying in the community, being available to give information and education and reminders about tree care to the community is really important.
Yeah.
That's great. And I love that point, Brad. And I think, community forestry work is not transactional work. It is relational work. And it depends, especially in our low canopy, underserved neighborhoods, on relationship building over time, on trust and rapport building. And the city recognizes that. And so we've been so grateful to have in the city these partners who, open up some opportunities for members of the nonprofit community and other folks that have been working in relation to neighborhoods to bring resources, to bring education, and then very importantly also to do close listening in those relationships for us to be getting community input, to be uplifting community leadership so that we can really do this work the right way and have not only more tree canopy equity across our neighborhoods, but also equitable processes as well.
Yeah. What are some of the opportunities and challenges you're working toward?
I think that right now we have incredible challenges and opportunities with, unfortunately, more, impacts of climate change really becoming visible in our day-to-day lives. There has been more public attention, more attention from different pools of funding, and more resources made available for urban and community forestry work, which is a really good thing. And there are more and more people, individuals, and organizations that want to get involved in this work, which is so powerful and exciting. And also, there's a lot of coordination that we need to do because we want to, make the most of this moment and make really great impact together. We want to leverage kind of the power of partnership and really put concerted efforts that will, take our planting and our stewardship work to the next level and avoid, wasting resources or, overlapping too much in our low canopy neighborhoods in a way that undermines trust. So I think one of our biggest, good challenges to have is just that we've got to get organized. And I mean, so much of that is already happening, which is so wonderful. But I know that's one thing that we feel very aware of, like this, there's so much good energy here that we just got to channel it correctly.
Yeah.
And I think also getting the best practices right, because urban and community forestry work is, this intersectional, interdisciplinary thing that involves people and groups. It also, is very much a science and an area of expertise and practice. And we want to make sure we're doing it right because trees take a long time to grow and they don't spring up on their own here in Denver. We need to put intention behind them and we really want them to thrive. So we want to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's challenges and opportunities. Trees have been identified as a solution to climate change impacts, and trees are buzzing right now. There's lots of funding coming down the pipe from lots of sources to plant trees in Denver across the nation. And so that's definitely an opportunity right now. Private property is a big opportunity. That's, like Mike said, that's where almost all our planting space is in Denver. So really doing that the right way and growing tree canopies in neighborhoods that way is important. We also have these couple challenges that I wanted to mention. The challenge of pruning and taking care of our mature trees and restoring the soil so that they stay around through their full maturity is really important. Removing trees is really important for safety. Both those things cost a lot of money. So we're working on that. Forestry is avidly working on that. Also, tree availability is a challenge coming soon too. Lots of people planting trees and wanting trees. And so the right species need to be used, and tree availability is a concern.
It's like supply and demand.
Challenge. Yes.
There's a lot of demand and not a lot of supply.
So I have great partners. They've learned well, it sounds like, huh?
Yeah.
I learn from them every time I talk to them. A couple of the challenges that we face as a city is actually working together with other agencies. Not saying we're the bully on the block or the, whatever, but we need more interagency communication because we could have more greenery. I'm just not going to solely pull out trees in this conversation. It's really about greenery. It's about native grasses, renewing the native grasses, using regionally appropriate trees, but just spaces of greenery.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge, I know there's a lot to say, but just to get to the challenge, the biggest challenge is concrete.
Mm-hmm.
There's no soil volume to grow the greenery, let alone trees. And Brad makes a good point. I mean, part of water conservation is actually soil health.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the biggest challenge I face as a city forester or as my staff faces is concrete. And they keep pouring it. They just keep pouring it. But we need more space for greenery.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah. We talked about private property, so I want to switch the attention here to residents. What can residents do to promote urban forestry in their private property or right away?
There are lots of ways that residents can get involved. So we, of course, love to have people volunteer with our organization, with other organizations doing tree planting and stewardship work. We have our Community Forester Workshop series that's starting up soon. People can just sign up to be a volunteer outside of that as well, helping with the planting, the stewardship of trees, which includes, monitoring trees, pruning them. Folks can do outreach work, just helping to spread awareness about the great opportunities to get low cost or free trees. Or they can, with certain organizations like our nonprofit, help with office work or things on the back end as well. We always encourage people, if they have their own spaces that can be planted, whether it's the public right-of-way, those street trees, or on their private property, we would love to plant up those spaces with the right tree in the right place and with the right method and all that stuff. But there are great opportunities to do that through the Park People's Denver Digs Trees program or other programming through the city's wonderful programming as well. And then we also, just recommend that people do that learning, get engaged and active in their neighborhoods.
I think that it's the best way for residents, or one of the best ways for residents to promote urban forestry, is to learn about your tree and learn about what your tree is doing in the ecosystem, how it fits in with everything else. And that is just going to open up lots of new questions and doors and learning. And then also, trees need water in the winter. So let's water trees year round appropriately. That's a good way to promote urban forestry.
Yeah.
That's an excellent idea. To winter water. Good job, Brad. There's a couple other things I want to add. The state nonprofit, I think they're still around. Yes, they are still around. Colorado Tree Coalition. They are the holders of the champion tree record for the state. So there's another way for folks to get involved with trees is just to go out and look for a champion. Mm-hmm. And they have a website, coloradotrees.org. But what a fun way. You take your kids out and just go look for champion trees on a weekend or something, or ride your bike or something and just go look. But that's something also. But something Brad said, actually, as I was preparing, because I knew Sensory was really going to just beat things into me about water. I know this isn't on the tape, but what was nice about this whole thing was I relived the global water cycle, getting ready for this talk. I relived learning about the global carbon cycle for this talk. I mean, what's that saying? Act locally or think globally, act locally. That's exactly what Denver's contiguous urban forest and partners are doing in our way, in our separate ways. So,
as a Denver resident, if I want to plant a tree, but I don't know, I don't have much knowledge about it, like what kind of tree to plant or where to plant it, what are some of the quick tips that you can give to those residents who want to get started planting trees, but they don't know how?
So there's a ton of resources out there. CSU Extension, our websites, Park People's websites, just a ton of information out there. So that would be probably number three on the list, probably. But the first thing that I would probably do is look at your site, look at your yard, see if you have space for a tree, and then think about what is the right tree for that space. So if you have a very wide open backyard, maybe you go for a large shade tree. If you don't, maybe you have a crabapple or some other fruit trees that are edible, things like that. I mean, there's shorter trees, there's medium-sized trees. Just look at your space. So right tree for the right site. Then I would start researching trees, and you start looking at the trees that you would like, that you possibly would like, that would fit the site. And then I would also, if you've never planted a tree before, I would learn how to plant a tree. I would go ask Kim at the Park People, or Brad at Climate Action and Sustainability and Resiliency Office. I mean, ask me, call me up. I talk to everyone, but just go educate yourself about how to plant a tree properly.
Yeah.
And then plant the tree. Now I'm gonna have my partners finish.
Mulching is really important to help the tree out. It absorbs moisture. It doesn't, dry out the soil. It really helps the tree survive also extreme temperatures. That's one.
It's important to plan for irrigation. So you want to just think through how you're going to water the tree, whether that's hand watering with a hose or a bucket. If you have a drip system, if your overspray from your sprinkler is going to get the tree. Though we certainly, we can grow our trees and also have water wise Coloradoscape without that green turf. So we want to be thinking about all of those pieces, but that watering is going to be an important piece of it.
Yeah.
Urban forestry offers such an important and special opportunity for our human communities to sort of rebuild our relationships with the land, with nature, with the environment, and to, really create that ecological relationship, like has been kind of talked about earlier, where, we have whole systems around and cycles around water and carbon and biodiversity, all of the things, and where, we are stewarding the land and it supports us in return. So I think that's just something that's so special about the acts of planting and stewarding trees. And also that active engagement around urban forestry offers us opportunities to build relationships with one another, with other people in our communities, build connection and trust, and relationships, which in our digital age, we're just kind of sometimes separated from one another. So I think that's a really special thing about it. And also in the face of, climate anxiety, I think it's a very powerful, tangible act, planting a tree and caring for it. And in getting engaged at the community level and with your neighbors, you are meeting other amazing people who want to do good things.
Yeah.
So there's just real power in that.
Climate anxiety. I haven't heard that before, but it's true. Like when we talk about climate change, oftentimes it's a lot of like gloom and doom and this sense of like inability, like what can I do? But there's a lot that communities can do together.
Mike, I'm surprised I haven't heard you talk about novel ecosystems.
You're right, Spencer. I totally forgot to bring that up. the Denver area, the Cherry Creek, South Platte confluence, it was originally a shortgrass prairie ecoregion. But through all the buildup of buildings and streets and sidewalks and more people moving in and et cetera, we have, as the Denver human population, we have created a novel ecosystem, an ecosystem that's just totally different from what was here naturally. And when you have a novel ecosystem, it's kind of like a standard that you have a framework to work in, but it's all very localized. You have to create how you're going to manage that novel ecosystem. And I think Sensory's Urban Ecology Group in DPR is doing amazing things where there's space and doing turf conversions and actually trying to bring back that shortgrass ecoregion. Will it be a full broad thrown blanket? Maybe not, because we have the people in Denver have changed this ecosystem so much that, again, you have to manage it different. You have to renew it differently. You have to protect it and preserve it just differently. Because basically, even though we brought trees in and we kind of blew it, because all that natural biodiversity is gone. Well, maybe not gone, but scattered. Yeah. And we created, again, a novel ecosystem by bringing the trees in.
I really liked what you said, and I'm guessing there's a certain element of creativity also that you have to use when you have to combine urban elements, people moving in, and then combine these elements of nature.
There is a lot of creativity of how we're bringing nature and biodiversity back into the city. But we have to think about ways to also protect it because of how much human use and disturbance goes into some of these sites.
Well, it's kind of like the carbon cycle, like the climate action. When I was revisiting my childhood and relearning the carbon cycle again, what I found interesting was that prior to, a bulk of human populations in one place, that the plants and just the greenery, the plants in that area could actually handle the carbon that was being created. But because of us, the system is literally out of balance. Hence all the talk about climate anxiety and vulnerability. I mean, the system is totally out of balance. And we can't plant enough green stuff to capture that carbon. And carbon stays in the atmosphere for like over 100 years or plus. And it doesn't go away very fast. We're just out of balance as a globe, not just in Denver.
Yeah.
But look at all the awesome stuff that the city, not only parks and our partners are doing to at least absorb as much as we can locally.
When it comes to things like climate anxiety, like it's so easy to feel overwhelmed and like, wow, even with how much we've warmed already or how much the climate is going to be warming, that we'll never get back to where we were. I think the question for us all now is, what are we creating now? And what can we create going forward? And I think one of the things that feels so powerful about trees and tree work is that it is a very tangible way that people can put their hands on something and together create something that even just and it's more than symbolic. Trees actually do stuff, but also can reinvigorate the human spirit about like, I'm going to be active with my life and my time in my hands. So I was think that's really powerful feeling.
And some of the highest climate change anxiety is with our youth, right? And so there's a tremendous opportunity to plant at schools and get kids and students getting their hands dirty, like Mike was saying and Kim was saying, and that's changing, and that just springboards you to a relationship with the environment. If you care about the environment, you want to protect it.
I want to thank you all for participating in this conversation. It was great meeting you all and talking about Urban Canopy. I myself learned quite a bit. I also want to thank you, Sincere, and all the guests from all the episodes who have made this podcast series a possibility. Thanks to Denver Parks and Recreation for their collaboration and input on all the topics we have covered. Thanks to Denver Community Media and all the staff here who have made this production possible, from turning on the cameras, the lights, the microphone. It's not a small feat for anyone. I invite everyone tuning in to check the entire series. We started in episode 1 talking about Denver Parks and Recreation's environmental priorities, their community involvement in developing their strategic plan called Game Plan for a Healthy City. In episode 2, we dived into the history of parks and design and how it evolved over the years. And we then continued the conversation discussing the importance of water conservation, transforming our landscapes from the perfect bluegrass to native plants, embracing the idea of environmental stewardship, and why it is important to protect our habitat, preserving our biodiversity and native landscapes. And finally, here in this final episode, where we discuss the importance and benefits of trees in our city. You can learn more about this initiative. It's in Denver's Nature on denvergov.org/nature. You can watch or listen all of the episodes on the Denver Community Media YouTube channel, as well as a few podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, Google Podcast, and Pocket Cast. Thank you again, and see you next time.